on the geopolitical front, some other interesting things happening. Let's go ahead and put this next one up on the screen. So this is, I hate the way this was even handled by Biden, but effectively, when he was on his way back from vacation, here's what happened. He was walking back from Marine One from on the South Lawn, and reporters screamed out at him, "President Biden, will you designate Russia as a state sponsor of terror?" President Biden just said no. Now, this actually sets up, as this article lays out, a pretty high-stakes fight with Congress, Krystal, because Congress has been clamoring to label Russia as a state sponsor of terror. Now, look, I mean, are what the Russians doing in Ukraine horrific, war crimes, all of that? Yeah, probably. Now, the issue is that if you state sponsor somebody terrorism, it kicks in even more levels of sanctions at a diplomatic level, and also kind of freezes the hands of the executive. Because if Congress designates, if the State Department designates somebody state sponsor of terror, there are all kinds of ramifications and things that the U.S. must actually ensure are not happening to eventually be taken off the list, that it kind of hamstrings the ability of the executive to both pursue any diplomatic negotiation in the future and also implements all kinds of rules that the U.S. government must then approach said state with. We've watched this with Iran. We've watched this with other quote-unquote state sponsors of terror. And it's one of the reasons why the U.S. executive has always been actually, frankly, very reluctant with other major powers to not designate them state sponsors of terror, even if they are clearly, within the bounds of rhetoric or, within the bounds of morality, is because doing it, it's kind of like in the 1990s, whenever they didn't want to say the word genocide with Rwanda, because if they did, they were like, we have to go do something about it. Right. Yeah. This is exactly the same. It sounds archaic and stupid, and it may sound like I'm, defending. I'm not defending Russia. I think what they're doing is horrific. But, by doing this, it would hamstring diplomatically any ability for us in the future to really try to come to any sort of settlement. And it would also make it much more difficult, if we ever wanted to roll back sanctions in the future if we wanted. Again, though, it doesn't seem like Congress really cares. The hawkish element within that from a bipartisan point of view is very strong.
The dividing lines here are very interesting. I mean, Pelosi and other Democrats, along with Republican colleagues, they are pushing
this.
And Biden and Blinken are on the other side of it. Biden and Blinken are correct. They remember early on in the war when Biden was casually throwing out Putin's a war criminal, and we were like, yeah, but maybe that's not helpful in terms of negotiations.
Exactly.
It's a very similar dynamic, except I would say it's even more of an important distinction here because, as you're saying, there are sort of direct legal ramifications of saying it. It's not just an impression that's created. So it would make it a lot more difficult for any potential diplomatic negotiations to move forward, which is exactly the case that Blinken and Biden have been making, which is basically listen, y'all, we're already sanctioning the hell out of Russia. We are doing everything you can do to them from an economic warfare point of view. We are backing up the Ukrainians with billions and billions of dollars in weapons. So we are all in. But to officially make this designation would be very unhelpful in terms of ever creating an off-ramp for Putin, ever hoping that you can wind this war down. And so it did make me wonder if there was some rethinking in the Biden administration of the approach that they've taken so far. I mean, this is a very small step ultimately, and we still see, the blank checks and the tens of billions of dollars going out the door asking for and further weapons shipments. But it's also true that the sort of top-level analysts have been wrong at every turn. Originally, the thought was Russia's so strong, they're just going to sweep in. They're going to take Kyiv in 3 days. It's going to be all over before there's, before you even know exactly what's going on. Well, that turned out to be incorrect. Then the thought was, okay, well, these economic sanctions that we're going to allow, they're just going to destroy Russia. It's going to just absolutely decimate them. Now, it has taken a toll, but and we're about to get to this in a couple minutes here, even the internal Russia, more dire assessments of what's going on there still doesn't live up to the expectations of the economic toll that these sanctions would ultimately take. And so it wouldn't surprise me if the Biden administration is somewhat reassessing and asking themselves, okay, what does this look like indefinitely? Because now it is clear, their dreams of we're going to defeat Putin and it's going to be the end and we're going to have a maximalist victory, that's not happening. So maybe this is a sign that they're sort of coming to their senses about the realities of the situation on the ground.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, at the basic, it does show they're not totally crazy, because here's what the Russians say. This is from the Russian Foreign Ministry on if such a designation would happen. If the legislative initiatives pass, it will mean Washington would cross the point of no return. The most serious collateral damage to bilateral diplomatic relations, up to their lowering or even breaking off entirely. The U.S. side has been warned. Now look, what the other side says shouldn't be the sole determinant, but listen, Saudi Arabia, that sounds like a state sponsor of terror to me. I don't see any designation on them. I mean, there's a reason for that, which is we need oil. So it's like real world consequences become a consideration regardless of whether the facts bear out or not. There's a reason that there's only 4: Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and Syria. None have any real great power say in the affairs of the world. And they're smaller economies with no real bearing on major diplomatic consequences for the US, save for Iran. And even that Iranian designation is a long time thing that people have been thinking about taking away as part of the Iran deal for a while. So the point that I'm making is that there are bigger considerations than technical definitions and what it would mean. Also, we should consider that a total break of US diplomatic relations with Russia would be a catastrophe. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And so if that, again, the Russians could be bluffing. I don't know. I mean, are they bad faith actors? Yes. Are they bellicose often? Of course. Now, are they lying or not? There's only one way to find out. And the only question is it worth it? So an interesting move there. We should still watch it, though, because Congress can still spur things in a direction.
Yeah.
And by passing some more resolutions.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.